Well, hey, welcome to Fundamentals of the Faith. I'm Pastor Matt here with Pastor Casey and John Davis, and very excited because this week we are sponsored by Starbucks. Just kidding, cut that out. They will come after us.
You gotta do like the generic coffee mug. Like they pull the labels off and then just
cover it up. There we go. No, we are still currently not sponsored by anybody, but if you'd like to sponsor Fundamentals of the Faith, you can go to give on the Bethlehem Church Live mobile app. No, I'm just kidding. But today we are diving into the Fourth Commandment, and I'm excited about the Fourth Commandment. The Fourth Commandment says this: you are to honor your father and mother. This is where we're going to make a shift from the first three commandments are really dealing with our relationship with God. And now in the 4th through 10th commandments, we're really going to deal with our relationship with one another, our neighbors, our parents, those relationships closest to us. Mm-hmm. And so we kick it off with, you are to honor your father and mother. So what does the Catechism say this means?
Yeah, so the Catechism actually goes much deeper than that, further than the surface level of father and mother. Mm-hmm. And it says this: what does this mean? We should fear and love God, so we hear that again, which we've heard for all the commandments. We should fear and love God so that we do not despise or anger our parents and other authorities, but honor them, serve and obey them, love and cherish them.
That's really cool. Yeah, I think this is an interesting commandment because it's kind of like a bridge. I was doing some research in Study Bible, and if you're studying the Bible on your own, there's a lot of great resources that you can grab. One of which is just a good study Bible. The Lutheran Study Bible is really good. This is one that I found on a Bible program I have. It's called the Faith Life Study Bible. And I thought it was really cool what they said here. They said, honor your father and mother. This acts as a hinge between the two categories of the laws, since it has elements of both divine and interpersonal relationship. The dual focus demonstrates that faith to God was central importance for the family, and is the only law with an entirely positive message and an offer of reward. So when you read it in Exodus, it kind of says it like this. It says that honor your father and mother, that the days may be long in the land that the Lord your God gives you. I thought that's really cool because when you think about it, God calls himself a father. So you do kind of see that dual relationship. How we honor our own fathers can be an actual reflection of how we honor our Heavenly Father.
Yeah, I think it's a really powerful picture. And now we will unpack that it does go beyond the family dynamic, but I think to understand that God's intentions, God's designs begin within the family dynamic, I think it's a really important thing for us to examine as people who come from families, as men now who are leading families, and for better or for worse, all of us come from a family. So to figure out what this means for us in our everyday interactions with those closest to us by blood, it's huge.
Yeah, and I like that you said for better or for worse, because I think whenever you're talking about a commandment like this, we should really deal with the elephant in the room. And the elephant in the room is this. It's like, if you come from a good family with good parents, I'm going to say good parents because no parents are perfect, except for God. But if you come from a good family, it's easy to look at this commandment and go, okay, well, it's easy to honor my parents because they are good people, and they're trying to raise you well. And so that's easy. But what about, for people that come from families, they may classify as dysfunctional parents that weren't good or maybe even abusive. Mm-hmm. How do you then look at a commandment like this? And that's, I think, where it gets a little bit more challenging in the application.
Yeah, absolutely. But even in the midst of that challenge, the commandment remains the same, and to figure out, what does that look like, is not always an easy thing to do.
Yeah, and I think to really start to unpack that, we have to really look at what does it mean to honor, to respect, to care for, to love, and to cherish.
Yeah, I think one of the things that comes to my mind, and I think it kind of connects with what we talked about a little bit with the second commandment. When I think of the word honor, I think about holding that person's reputation to the highest regard or the highest esteem, understanding that my own way of being, my own behavior is going to communicate something about those other people. So to think about honoring my own parents would be, for me, I think, doing the kinds of things that would earn them an even better name. Or I think about my own children, seeing them do things that reflect well on their mom and me, I think is a moment where I feel honored. So I don't know if that captures everything, but at least as I begin to think about what it might look like to honor, that's what comes to my mind.
Well, yeah, and I think the second part of that, what does this mean, kind of covers that. It says, not just are we not supposed to despise or anger our parents, but by honoring them, by serving them, obeying, listening to them, and just loving them. Like, there's the things that we shouldn't do, but then there's the things that God tells us to do to honor them and put that good name on there. So.
Yeah, it's kind of like honor is not a reaction, it's a choice.
Yeah.
And so you choose how you're going to interact with somebody around you. And I think it's a really important commandment because I think a lot of times we think about this commandment for our kids, but it's not a commandment that God says you grow out of. Like honoring your parents is something that extends into your adult life. And I think it's really interesting. You see Jesus talk about this in Matthew chapter 15, and he actually chastises the Pharisees and the scribes because these traditions they have created kind of stand in the way of people carrying out the commandments. And this is what he says in Matthew 15. Then the Pharisees and scribes came to Jesus from Jerusalem and said, "Why do your disciples break the tradition of the elders? For they do not wash their hands when they eat." And he answered, "And why do you break the commandment of God for the sake of your tradition? For God commanded, 'Honor your father and mother,' and whoever reviles father or mother must surely die. But you say, 'If anyone tells his father or mother, what you would have gained from me is given to God, he need not honor his father and mother. So for the sake of your tradition, you have made void the word of God, you hypocrites.'" And I think that's really interesting. What Jesus is kind of saying there is, look, this commandment, it extends forward. And we can't create other rules and traditions that kind of violate us doing the very basic thing God's told us to do, which is to honor our parents. And so he's looking at a group of probably adults saying, hey, your obligation to honor your parents hasn't stopped. Yeah. You need to continue caring for them into the future. And I think it's a really interesting thing because I was listening to a guy, Jason Dorsey, who leads a thing called the Center for Generational Kinetics. And he looks at the different generations and how they interact with each other in the workplace and in life. Does a lot of consulting with companies and things like that. And one of the things he said that was really interesting is when he was talking about Gen X. And he said Gen X is in this unique stage of life where they're caring for their own children, but they're also taking on the care of their parents. And so in this, we've got this whole group of people, some of which are probably listening to this podcast right now, that are really wrestling with that kind of two sides of the commandment. You have children that you're trying to teach to honor their parents, so they'll learn, as John's going to talk about, to honor the authorities around them and respect the structures that have been put in place by God. But also trying to navigate that commandment of raising their own children and then still taking care of, their parents and honoring their parents in their next, or even you could call it last stages of life.
Yeah, and I think kind of going off what you were saying earlier, Casey, about honoring and putting that good name on them, I think that's how we can kind of look at no matter what your relationship with your parents is, whether it's good, bad, whether your parents are even here now or not, the way you act yourself still puts a name on and honors those people that have come before you, whether they're still here, whether they're not, whether you have a good relationship, whether you're a bad relationship. The way that you can honor them is the way you live your life now and honoring and cherishing them and being there for them.
Yeah. So I'm curious to hear from you. I have some thoughts myself about this. But as men now who have been firmly planted in adulthood now for more than a few years.
For several years.
How do you go about keeping this commandment and honoring your own parents? And it's an especially complicated situation, I think, for all of us because none of us live close to our parents geographically. So figuring out how to do that as adults and doing it from afar, how do you go about making that work?
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I think, I think there's several different ways. I think one is just checking in on my parents. My parents are in that getting ready to, my dad steps into retirement in January. So they're in that like first phase of retirement where they're kind of like enjoying retired life. They're healthy, thank God, that's a blessing. And they're kind of, starting to step into that stage of life together. And so part of what we do is just try to make space for one another, to get the family together, make sure the kids get to know their grandparents, and try and honor them that way, check in on them, see how they're doing. But I think another thing that we've been doing, just as a way to honor our parents, is I think as a parent, you always feel this obligation to your children. You always feel like you're supposed to care for them. And, I talked to, I had a good friend, Les, who told me, he was in his 70s, and he told me, your kids are always your kids. You always worry about them like your kids, even when they're grown. And so something that I try to do in honoring my parents is to try to take some of that burden off. To kind of thank them for, hey, you guys did a great job raising us. My brother and I were self-sufficient. We've been blessed to be able to get married to some great women. Him one and myself. I'd like to clarify. One, I'm only married to one. But the point is to kind of let them know, to kind of help take some of the pressure off, and say, you guys don't have to worry about us. It's okay for you to, take care of yourselves in this season. I think that's kind of part of it for us. It's kind of one of the ways we're trying to honor our parents.
Yeah, I think it's kind of actually funny that like you asked that, because me and my wife were just in our home state, our home nation of Texas, recently, and visited our parents. And it's kind of funny. This might sound like funny, but one of the ways that like I feel like I honor my parents is like anytime I'm like around them, because they do live far away, just like trying to do as much as I can, like that they haven't done like in the years since I've been at their house yet. So like, for instance, in the 4 days I was with my parents this time, we had got my dad one of those like Ring doorbells like a year ago, and like obviously he hasn't set it up. So like set that up for him, like help him work on some electronic stuff around the house, but just like be a helpful hand. That I used to do all those things, but now I live farther away, so I don't get to help as much. So just try to help out as much as I can, but then also kind of what you were saying. I feel like how I can honor my parents, especially living further away and being a little older now, is just like remembering to call them and talk to them. Because obviously, this age, there's not like a whole lot like physically and stuff that they do for me or I do for them, being so far away and stuff. But it's more on the lines of like the emotional like care and stuff. Like, hey, I'll try to call my mom like at least once or twice a week, because no matter how old I am, I'm still her youngest child and her baby, and she wants to talk to me. So things like that. So
yeah, and I think for me, after becoming a parent, realizing how rewarding and fun it is to do just like parent things. I found that from afar, to create moments for my mom to still be my mom for me, or like my dad to be my dad, like especially thinking about moments where like, hey, calling my dad up because I need some advice about something, and thinking like, if my son were to do that for me, I would feel like, yeah, I did something great today.
Right.
So to think like, all right, in those moments, even though maybe they feel far away, entering into a live relationship with them is a big part of how I go about doing it right now.
And that's huge. And I think too, honoring your parents is, we think about that oftentimes from the child perspective, but as a parent, how do you help navigate that? I think it's really interesting what Paul says in Ephesians. He's commanding the children, obey your parents, honor your father and mother. This is the first command with a promise, that it may go well with you and that you may live long in the land. But fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. And so it's really interesting how Paul kind of takes this spin on it. And he says, yeah, the commandments for children to parents, but parents, think about how you're parenting. And I think that's a really important key, because, I think how we parent is just as important as our children honoring us. And I think as a parent, it's really important to kind of step back and say, what age and stage are my kids in, and what kind of parent do they need me to be now? Because that's going to change as life moves on. I'm trying to raise my kids to be self-sufficient, and so kind of the level of care and attention they get now needs to shift and change as they're growing up. And then I know some people have children that are more adult children, whether they're getting into their early 20s or their early 30s. And how you parent for your children there needs to be radically different than when they were in high school or elementary school, right? The relationship, the commandment doesn't change, but the dynamics of the relationship can change. And that's a good thing. And I think it comes back to that question of just, don't exacerbate your kids. Like, make sure that your discipline is leading them toward God, or make sure that you're correcting in your direction. The things that you're doing are helping them move toward God, because He's the ultimate Father that you want them looking to.
Yeah, and I think the Catechism even points out that the reason that this is such an important commandment and God gave it to us is that parents and, as we'll kind of get into, all other authorities are God's kind of agents over us, to watch over us and protect us, parents specifically with that. So that's why we need to not only honor them while we're children, but when we look at it as parents, like, that's a big responsibility that God has given us. So it's not just like you're saying, it's not just a command that as we're the ones underneath the authorities to follow, but when you find yourself now in that position where you are kind of that God's agent, God's authority over someone else, like, wow, this is a big responsibility that I need to follow too.
Yeah, I think that's so, like, honoring, for example, the command to honor your parents should extend into things like honoring your employer, honoring the people that you work for. As Christians, I think one of the best witnesses we can bring is to bring our best to work, so that people see, okay, what's different about this person? Why is it that when everybody else is talking about the boss behind their back, these people aren't? Oh, well, there's something different here. They're connected to Jesus.
Yeah.
They're trying to live out this commandment in their everyday life.
Yeah, and I think this is one of the harder commandments, I think, for the kind of generation that we're living in now, because I feel like older generations, probably like one generation behind me, probably even, honoring authority and your elders and people above you was just the norm in society, right? Like, even if it was a stranger, if someone was older than you, you were polite to them, you respected them because they were your elder. You don't really hear that phrase much anymore, like respect your elders, because it's not really what the generations now are doing. The generations now are kind of taught, like, be skeptical of anybody in power, like, if you don't agree with them, like, they don't matter, like, you don't have to respect them, all those things, which I think is why this commandment is so much more important today, is because, I think we all have people that are in authority above us, whether it's a work or everybody always likes to talk about politics and stuff, whatever it is, we all have people in authority that maybe we don't agree with, but God says, hey, those people were placed in authority and we have to honor and respect them.
And I think it's important for us to distinguish, like, you can admit that having a certain authority above you is a challenge, and maybe you don't like it,
Right.
but you can still keep this commandment by respecting and even honoring those above you, whether
Right.
they are bosses that you really wish you didn't have to work for,
Yeah.
or politicians you really disagree with on a foundational level. The Christian faith would say it is still possible,
Right.
and even necessary to honor and even I would go so far as to say love those people, not
Right.
in the sense of, like, lovey-dovey romance kinds of stuff, but like, I will do what's in my power to seek your good
Right.
and your welfare, even if that comes at great cost to
Right.
me.
Yeah.
And I think, it's really hard, but I think like you pointed out, like, this is the opportunity for Christians to look really weird and really different in a good way.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you can disagree with and yet still honor
Right.
somebody in authority. I think a beautiful example of that would be the things that you saw in the civil rights movement. Dr. Martin Luther King and some of the stuff that they did. That was a shining example of disagreeing with those in authority and yet respecting those in authority at the same time. And so, I think that's really important, especially for our culture today, because you're absolutely right. We've really lost the understanding of what honor really is, and we're kind of in a shame culture.
Yeah.
For lack of a better term.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times we have a hard time like finding examples of this sometimes, but I mean Jesus did this multiple times. I mean, and if you think of anybody that had ultimate authority, he even says all authority on heaven and earth has been given to God is Jesus is the ultimate authority, and he even submitted to his parents.
Yeah,
it's in the Catechism. It has this from Luke. And it says, and he, Jesus, went down with them, his parents, Mary and Joseph, and came to Nazareth and was submissive to them. And his mother treasured up all these things in her heart. So Jesus, who was there at the beginning with God of the universe, submitted to his parents and listened to his parents and saw the authority of his parents. He also told his disciples and people to, pay taxes to Caesar. Give to Caesar what is Caesar's. Caesar probably wasn't the most upright, righteous, definitely wasn't the most upright, righteous ruler, but Jesus said, he is who is in authority over this land, so honor me and love me and follow me, but also honor him and pay the taxes to him and do what the government might tell you to do, because that's what God told us to do.
Yeah, because we forget, the initial sin in the garden wasn't just pride, it was, I don't want somebody in authority over me. Why can't I be God? And so Adam and Eve fall into that, and then all of a sudden, you fast forward to the New Testament, and what does Jesus show us? Jesus perfectly lives out this commandment by in the Garden of Gethsemane. Is he wanting to move forward with that plan? No, it's not the easy plan, but he says, not my will, but your will be done. So Jesus allows himself to be under authority of the Father. And so, that's, the whole justification process is made right because Jesus allows himself to sit under this commandment perfectly.
Yeah, and I think, it sounds like one of those cliche things, but if Jesus can do it, then if Jesus can prove that, man, even he can go under authority, I think that definitely shows that we need to do that because we're definitely not Jesus.
Or that it's even just the way of Jesus.
Yeah.
That is Jesus' way of doing things, and those who follow after him walk that same path, right?
Yeah, he's been through everything that you guys are going to go through, that we've all been through. He's gone through. He's had to go through the authorities that aren't necessarily the most upright, and he followed them. Even when they were trying to kill him, he was silent and let the government action play out and just let it go,
Yeah.
So that's the way he is.
That's powerful. I think, I hope you guys are starting to see that, these commandments aren't just, they aren't just for a middle school student, to learn so that he can say, I'm taking faith on myself. These are very adult commandments that have adult applications in our everyday life. And so that's a big part of fundamentals of the faith, is just being able to see those application points in our everyday life. So thanks for taking this time to dive into the Fourth Commandment. We're looking forward to next week as we dive into the Fifth Commandment. If you like this content, feel free to rate it on your favorite podcast platform. Feel free to share it with your friends, whether they go to church or whether there's somebody that just wants to explore faith more. This is a great resource to share. So you can find this resource and more resources right there on the Bethlehem Church Live mobile app or bethlehemchurch.live. And until next week, it's been a joy hanging out with you right here on Fundamentals of the Faith.